Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us today. On behalf of Calgary Public Library, I would like to welcome you to today's program, Frauds, Scams, and Shams, Online Real Estate Fraud, Protect Yourself. Presented by Cheryl Rumpel, Senior Investigator with the Real Estate Council of Alberta. I will shortly introduce Cheryl. I would like to acknowledge that we live on the ancestral and traditional Indigenous territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika-Sitabi, Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Tsuut'ina, Îyârhe Nakoda, nations of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Morley. The city of Calgary, Mohkinstsis, is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. This presentation is approximately 20-25 minutes. We will have a question period at the end. Please ask your questions through the chat or the Q&A button. It's located on your Zoom controls at the bottom of the screen. My name is Laila. I am the host on behalf of the Calgary Public Library, and our presenter is Cheryl Rumpel, is a certified financial crimes investigator employed by the Real Estate Council of Alberta as a senior investigator. Her focus is to investigate, detect, and suppress fraud as it relates to the industry and to protect consumers. Cheryl has a strong commitment to safeguarding against fraud. In 2019, Cheryl was internationally recognized by the Council on Licensure Enforcement and Regulation as the recipient of their 2019 Investigative Excellence Award. And I'll just pass it to Cheryl now.
Thank you. Are you still able to see my screen? I just had something odd happen here.
Yes, I see.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting us. Awareness is the first step in fraud prevention, so thank you for taking an interest in how online fraud can happen with real estate. As stated, I'm a senior investigator with the Real Estate Council of Alberta. And if you're not familiar with RECA, I'll just take a minute or two to explain what the council is and what we do. Then we'll take a look at online ads and some real life examples of fraud. The Real Estate Council of Alberta is the governing authority that oversees the real estate industry in the province of Alberta. Our authority comes to us by way of provincial legislation, the Real Estate Act of Alberta. We're an independent governing authority, which means the industry is self-regulated, but we fall under the purview of the Ministry of Service Alberta, the ministry that is responsible for consumer protection. RECA is responsible to license and regulate real estate agents, mortgage brokers, as well as property and condominium managers. We ensure that they've obtained the required education and maintain the professional standard. We also provide information and resources to both consumers and industry professionals. Information enhances industry and consumer protection. And that's our mandate, simply put. It is to protect consumers and to provide services that enhance and improve the real estate industry. Information provides protection. A great source of information is our website, www.reca.ca. It also has one of the best tools to help protect against fraud, our license search. It can help sort out what may or may not be real. Is the person you've connected with online even real? If so, are they licensed and authorized to conduct this transaction? The first step would be to check their name against the license search. So from our website, you would click on the tab that says Find a Licensee, and it would take you to this page. Here, you would just type in the name and the city, and it would show you if they are licensed and in which areas of practice, whether it's real estate, mortgage broker, etc. It'll also show you if they're suspended or if they've experienced a lifetime ban. From here as well, you could also access the disciplinary decisions page, and that might provide additional information as well. The point here is to know who you're dealing with, especially if the person you're dealing with is online. Are they licensed? Are they even real? Sifting through what may or may not be real online is one of the challenges. Deception or misleading information may lead to fraud, including online real estate fraud. So first, let's ask, why do fraudsters lure virtually? Not just in real estate, but across the board. Why do fraudsters lure online? Basically because it's free open access. It reaches the masses so that they are able to cast a great big net. And sadly, because it works. But it's also opaque. An opportunity exists for scant contact details. The ad may have just been a first name and a cell phone number, which can be easily edited and changed. Compare the contact details against a license search, not just in real estate. Most regulated industries will have some form of license search, from lawyers, accountants to prepaid contractors. Research who you're dealing with, especially anyone online. Next, let's look at how the market creates conditions that are susceptible to online fraud. Online fraud ads target emotion. They manipulate an emotional vulnerability. Low inventory creates a hot market. You may have heard it referred to as a seller's market. It's a situation where there are more people wanting to buy than there are actually properties for sale. A hot market creates a sense of urgency with an act now, ground floor messaging. There's a shortage of inventory and you could get left behind or miss out. The urgency creates thought-stopping decision-making. It creates an act now response. There's also the emotion of desperation. Desperation exasperated by low inventory. These are people who may be in a tough financial situation, afraid of becoming homeless. Fear is the emotional hook. The desperate can be especially heartbreaking. So let's look at that a bit closer. Let's look at an example of a type of fraud that targets victims afraid of falling behind or missing out. The seller financing fraud. Now, just to clarify, there can be legitimate seller financing transactions if the seller owns the property outright, if it's mortgage-free. In these situations, however, the property has a mortgage. Here, the target are people who need housing, but their financial situation is such that they can't obtain traditional financing. They are enticed by innovative outside-the-box solutions. So how does this work? Well, sorry, my screen just went odd on me. How does this work? The seller agrees to sell the property for monthly payments rather than the full purchase price up front. They'll receive a down payment, which will go to the fraudster as their commission, and subsequent monthly payments. The payments are usually the mortgage payment value plus a little extra. The additional sum is intended to build equity. The problem here is with the mortgage. Without the full purchase price, the seller can't clear the mortgage, and they remain responsible for that debt, the repayment of that debt. They are dependent on timely, full monthly payment value from the buyer. The fraudster will continue to act as an intermediary between the seller and the buyer by collecting the monthly rents. They pocket the money and no funds are remitted as payment towards the mortgage. Eventually, the bank will foreclose. Further, the buyer needs to trust that the mortgage is being paid, that it is current and up to date. The buyer has no rights with respect to the mortgage. They have no access to information concerning it. Both the debt and the title belong to the seller. If the mortgage payments are not made, the bank will eventually foreclose. The buyer won't receive any notice of a foreclosure. They won't know until the bank sells the property and they are served with a notice of eviction. The buyer has no true registered enforceable interest. Also, despite a large down payment, the scammed buyer usually builds little, if any, equity in the property. The purchase price is usually inflated well above the market. It is inflated in value because the financing arrangement is doing them a favor, a sort of premium that's charged for unusual financing. So what would be the red flags? Well, Beware of ads advertising seller financing deals, but also be aware of situations where both parties are pressured to use the same lawyer. Get legal advice that represents your interests alone. Additionally, sometimes the buyers are told that the title can be held in trust, and this is just not true. So what does this look like in real life? Let me give you an example of one transaction that happened to real people. It's complex, but I'll try and keep it as simple as I can. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. In this transaction, both the buyer and the seller responded to an ad on Kijiji. The sellers were enticed because the market had slowed and they were led to believe that they would receive premium value for their home by providing this form of financing. The transaction involved a large deposit, regular monthly payments, and a couple of balloon payments. The buyer's employment situation made it difficult for her to qualify for a mortgage, but she did have cash. Her money came from the sale of her existing home that was now too small for her growing family. It had been a home that she had worked very hard for and had acquired with the assistance of Habitat for Humanity. It had been her first step forward into stable housing. The fraudsters were a team. Person one put the deal together. It was their name and phone number on the ad. Person two was in the middle. It was their name on the contracts. The seller thought person two had bought their house, and the buyer believed they had purchased it from person two. Persons one and two kept their relationship to each other hidden from the other parties. The buyer paid her down payment and then made all future payments to person two. The seller received the deposit and paid person one the commission, but they received no more payments. They believed that the payments were going directly to the mortgage. The fraudsters, however, acting as intermediaries, pocketed both the balloon payments and the monthly payments. Nobody paid the mortgage. Eventually, the bank served the sellers with a notice of foreclosure, and the sellers, of course, were shocked. Not only was their credit rating negatively affected, but now they also discovered they owed thousands in missed payments, arrears, and penalties. They were angry and went to the property to confront person two, who they thought had purchased and occupied the property. What they found was the buyer and her family, and she, of course, was startled, bewildered, and defiant because she had made all of her payments. This was the first time that each became aware of the other. Both claimed a right to the property, and it became a big legal mess. Eventually, the sellers reclaimed their property, but were required to pay thousands to the bank in order to bring the mortgage up to date. The buyer and her family were left homeless and out tens of thousands, all because they had responded to an ad similar to this one. Seller financing, no qualifying financing. What these ads are selling is not so much an actual property as it is the method of financing. These pictures could be any stock picture of any house. The description, what they are selling, is the method of financing, the innovative outside the box way to home ownership. Now keep in mind that the typical sellers prefer to sell their home all at once and not over time. They do not want the inconvenience of this type of arrangement. The focus, the active marketing of this form of financing, may indicate that there's a party in the middle who intends to profit. These ads target people who are unable to buy through traditional means. The ads inspire hope. The actual property is not nearly as important as the hope and the possibility of maybe being able to buy. Let's look at another example where the target victims are in a tough financial position. Again, I'll try and keep it simple as I can without losing the essentials. This is the foreclosure fraud. These ads offer assistance to individuals who are in danger of foreclosure or of defaulting on their mortgage. The hook here is the hope of rescue. They can stay in their home. They usually have been in the property a long time and have built equity, yet somehow have fallen behind in their payments. They have equity, but cash flow problems. Keeping their home is paramount to them. They are offered a debt consolidation scheme that involves an upfront fee and the transfer of title to the fraudster. They transfer the title, but they are still responsible for any debt that's secured against the title, such as a mortgage. The registered debt cannot be transferred. The fee and the cash for the urgent past due bills are written into a loan. This debt consolidation loan usually has a serious, if not criminal, rate of interest. They are allowed to remain in the home as tenants who pay monthly rent and monthly payments towards the loan. The fraudster, now having the title, then remortgages or sells the property, taking out the equity. If the property is sold, the victims are evicted. They become homeless. They no longer have any right or claim to the property because the title was transferred. Seniors are especially vulnerable to this. They are often longtime homeowners who tend to have equity, but some changes in their income flow may have caused them to fall behind. Their sole focus is to remain in their home. They want to believe in the rescue. They are eager to trust and believe and do not question the contracts. Whoever the victim is, it's the contract that causes the title to be transferred that is the deception. Always read, review, and understand anything you sign. If you're signing it, you're agreeing to it. Know what it is that you're agreeing to. Unfortunately, sometimes people who are in a hard financial situation are reluctant to take on the added expense of seeking legal advice. But sadly, the cost of a nefarious contract may vastly outweigh any cost for independent legal advice. Always read and review everything you sign and get independent advice. Now, I'm trying to keep these examples simple, but you can see how the transaction itself can be confusing. It's easy to see how a victim can fall prey because the transaction itself is so overwhelming. Now let's move away from home ownership and look at rentals. There's also fraud in the rental market. The victim responds to an online ad for a rental. It's probably a really good deal, well below the average market rate. Remember, they're casting a wide net. The victim connects with a person they believe is the landlord. They secure the rental with a deposit and maybe the first month's rent. On moving day, they show up with their fully loaded U-Haul and the property isn't vacant or not even for rent. There may even be other victims converging on the property at the same time. They've all paid their deposit to a fraudster. If you're looking to rent, make sure the landlord actually owns the property. Meet with the person. A red flag would be a landlord who is always out of town. Meet with them, ask for ID, ask for confirmation of ownership, either copy of the title or the municipal tax roll. Honest people understand skepticism. Do not be worried about offending them. And do not send a deposit to anyone other than the true owner. Out of town, absentee landlords should have a licensed representative. If the online person represents the landlord, they must have a license. Check the license search. Also, any deposits paid to a representative must be paid through a brokerage, not to an individual. A deposit would be payable to the property management brokerage. Our search tool also confirms licensed brokerages. Never pay a deposit to an individual representative. Deposits should be made to either the true owner or the property management brokerage. And always have a paper trail. Get receipts and never pay cash. But before you even consider providing a deposit, you ought to have a written rental agreement. Rents are paid in exchange for the right to occupy a space. Your rights are spelled out in the written agreement. If you don't have paper, you don't have rights. Beware of any rental situation where the interaction is online only. You should be able to meet with a real person, and you ought to be able to physically view the property. not just from the outside, but the interior as well. If you're discouraged from seeing or inspecting the inside, that's a red flag. Something is off. If you have a paperless agreement with an absent landlord who's only interacting online, you may have a virtual rental. Your money is very real. Be sure that the person, place, and paper are real before you give them your money. I also want to give you one more example of a devastating type of fraud. The straw buyer fraud. This sort of fraud is most common. This is the most common tool used in mortgage fraud, and it never ends well. This can come by way of make money quick ads. The victim is told any number of lies, but the goal here is to obtain personal information from someone with a good credit score, and then use that information to secure a mortgage. Their name and information is used to obtain a mortgage and buy a property. The victim may or may not know that is the purpose, but in any event, they become the buyer of a property in name only, a straw buyer. The fraudsters might make mortgage payments for a time. They do this to maintain control of the property while they use it for perhaps nefarious purposes. Eventually, however, the payments stop. The bank forecloses, and it's the straw buyer that is responsible for repayment. It is the straw buyer who is then sued for any shortfall, arrears, penalties, outstanding tax, damage to the property, etc. They may have made a few quick dollars initially, but the eventual cost is enormous. And not only is there a financial cost, but their credit is also ruined. Any hope of future home ownership is dashed. Also, mortgage fraud is a crime. Straw buyers, by allowing their information to be used, may be considered participants in the fraud. They may even face criminal charges. So beware of any ad or scheme that promises quick money or wants to use your personal information. If you want to know more about this type of scheme or others, you can find more on our website. Here you can find a good deal of information regarding mortgage fraud, as well as many other consumer-related topics and information. So visit RECA.ca for more good stuff, including our license search. And now let's just wrap up with a few recap of some tips. Fraud prevention tips. Does the ad make sense? Is it too good to be true? Is it urgent? The fraud sales pitch often tries to discourage critical thinking or thought stopping. So get an objective perspective. No deal is too good to not do your due diligence. Review contracts. Get legal advice. The potential cost of a bad contract far outweighs the cost of good legal advice. Read everything you sign. If you're signing it, you're agreeing to it. You might want to hurry and get to the good stuff like the purchase contract or the lease agreement, but read all the other documents as well. Know what it is that you're agreeing to. These last two items, the check your land title and check your credit rating, well, those are just good housekeeping practices like maintenance for your finance. Checking your land title can be done through any registry office or directly through land titles. To check your credit, there are plenty of credit monitoring apps, but Equifax and TransUnion can also provide you with a copy of your report. Staying aware of potential fraud and practicing good habits may prevent you from becoming a victim of fraud. It may protect you, the consumer. So thank you for your awareness and attention. I believe I've left enough time for some questions, and if you have any, I'll try and answer them now.
Yes, Cheryl, there's a number of questions. The first one was about the title not being able to held in trust.
Right. You can register against a title, but I'm not aware of any mechanism to hold a title in trust. It just, you either own it or you don't. It could be held as part of an estate planning sort of situation where the trust is the owner, but I'm not aware of. That's a common thing that they're told that is just not possible.
Okay. Another question, what is the email address or perhaps the website address to do the searches online?
www.RECA, which stands for Real Estate Council of Alberta. So www.reca.ca.
Okay, I'll just write that in the chat here, reca.ca. Okay. And the next question, how does one check the land titles, and do you have to pay for it?
Yes, you do have to pay for it. I think it's about $20 or something like that. But you would go into a registry office with your property information, like your land description, and they would be able to perform a search for you right there. Or you can go directly to the building downtown, this Bolin building, I think it is. Or you can access land titles online just by Googling Alberta land titles, and they have an online portal where you should be able to access it there. You still have to pay for it, but I think it's $20.
Someone in chat mentioned that it's $10 for a
Oh, okay.
land title search.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And another question, how do you check your credit rating?
Well, like I said, there's a number of credit monitoring apps that you could subscribe to, but also you can go online and access either Equifax or TransUnion or both of them, and they will their websites would provide you with information as to how to obtain a copy of your own personal credit report. So I would refer you to their websites.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
That's the end of our presentation here. And thank you very much, Cheryl, for this very informative presentation.
Great.
Thank you.